Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Johnny Vedmore Show on today's News Talk TNT. That chat with Chris Saxman was extremely informative. What a very nice man. I hope we'll speak to him again. And my second guest on today is Dr. John Laughland. He is the director of Forum for Democracy International and a lecturer in political science and history at the Catholic Institute of Vendée in Western France. He was a director of the Eurosceptic think tank European Foundation until 2008 and director of studies at the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation in Paris until 2018. He worked in the European Parliament from 2018 to 2020. You can find him on his website at fvdinternational.com or on X at John_Laughland, which is LAUGHLAND. Mr. Laughland, thank you for coming on the Johnny Vedmore Show. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
You know, it's going to be a very interesting. I was looking through your stuff yesterday, and it was very interesting, and it brought me a load of questions straight to my mind, which I think you're the man to answer. So I'm looking forward to this. Now, to start off, are the citizens of Britain being purposely divided by a Labour Party which is subservient to a grand globalist agenda?
Yes.
Oh, I should have written that question a lot more carefully.
Would you like me to elaborate on that?
Yeah, please elaborate, please.
I mean, the virulence with which Keir Starmer turned on the initial protests or riots, as they were called, the virulence was really, really appalling. Indeed, I do believe that Starmer is a fully paid up globalist. And like all globalists, I think that he hates his people. He hates his own people. You see this. I live in France. You see this with Emmanuel Macron, who hates France. Starmer is very much from the same mold. When I say virulence, he came on worse than a schoolmaster, the full force of the law. Mr. Prosecutor, if it moves, put it in jail. No feeling at all, no feeling for the room, as they say, no feeling for the legitimate anger at what had happened, which, by the way, has now been totally forgotten. And instead, I personally find him a bit of a psychopath, actually. His coldness, I mean, we're used to robotic politicians. We've had plenty of them. Sunak's a robot. One forgets, doesn't one? There have been so many now, but they're all a bit robotic. Even Boris became robotic when he was in power. But Starmer has a sort of Dalek-like cruelty to him, which I find particularly preoccupying. And you say it's is he the servant of a globalist elite? Well, yes, I do think he is. There was an LCI interview, LCB. Sorry, I'm mixing it up with a French television station interview with Starmer before the election, in which he was asked. You probably saw it. He was asked, would he have accepted to serve in a Jeremy Corbyn government? And he refused to answer, and they went back and forth, and there was a very uncomfortable moment, uncomfortable for him anyway. And then he blurted something out to try to get out of the situation that he put himself in, because he wouldn't say whether or not he would have served under Corbyn. He said, if I had gone into government, I would have done two things. I would have rooted out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and I would have ensured that Labour never changed its position on NATO. What an extraordinary thing to say. Nobody was talking about NATO in the British general election. NATO is not an issue. People don't vote on NATO or anti-NATO. But what he said, what he meant, or what he revealed rather, by blurting that out, was indeed, in my view, his true raison d'être, his true function. And that is the thing that he was really interested in. That was the only thing that mattered, because, of course, Corbyn, as we all know, was more or less anti-American, and he'd at one point said he wanted to close the British, the American, the RAF bases, which are, of course, in reality American bases in Britain and things like that. So, yes, I think Corbyn is quite genuinely a fully paid up globalist. And then, of course, there's the other famous clip, which I expect you've seen and many of our viewers have seen, where Emily Maitlis asked him, "Would you prefer Davos or Westminster?" And he replied, as if it was bloody obvious. "Oh, Davos, of course, because Westminster is this stupid provincial place where you can't get anything done." So yes, I think he is, and like all, as I said at the beginning, like all globalists, he has a certain contempt for his own people, and certainly no feeling for what they are thinking.
Yeah, you mentioned there Corbyn, and of course, Starmer has promised that he purged the left of his party that was anti-Semitic, supposedly anti-Semitic. Now, do you think he'll attempt to purge the right of the country in a similar fashion to a communist dictatorship? And is that kind of what we're seeing with the accusations of everybody being far right?
I do, and again, that's that's an indication of his globalism, because the same thing has been done in France, where I live, and in Germany, which is a country I know quite well, and perhaps in other countries as well. At the beginning of 2024, there were huge demonstrations across the whole of Germany against the far right, following basically a piece of disinformation in the media. And in nearly all German cities, people poured out onto the streets to demonstrate against the far right, just as they did in England a few weeks ago. In France, the danger of the far right has been used now for decades, and was used once again, yet again for the 100th time, but unfortunately to great effect in the elections that took place in July before the Olympic Games started, because the biggest party in the first round was the Rassemblement National. It was immediately labelled, as it has been for years, fascism, Nazism, and all the rest of it. And lo and behold, once again, the left rallied and deprived the Rassemblement National of a majority. So this is a trick that has been used repeatedly, and doesn't seem to. It's the trick that keeps on giving, the gift that gives on, carries on giving. It doesn't seem to stop. And yes, I think that he, and of course there are people, as you know, on social media who speculate that the far right demonstrations that were pre-announced and then never took place were themselves, I mean, it may just be a speculation, but were themselves a piece of disinformation to bring out the anti-far people onto the street. So yes, I think, and it, although it works, because now people came out to, what is it now, a week, 10 days ago, to demonstrate against the far right in Britain. In reality, the far right in Britain doesn't exist. There's no such thing as the far right in Britain. There's no political party, there's no structure, or if there is, it's very marginal. People who reacted against the stabbings in Southport were just angry. They were angry at the stabbings, they were shocked, they were emotional. And yes, they took out their anger against immigrants, which, no doubt is, if you're being very precise, is perhaps unfair or whatever, but at the same time is not entirely difficult to understand, given the horror of the act. So yes, I think he is. That's exactly what I think.
Yep. That is it's a good rundown on what you just said there. I am not surprised that people went out on the streets and got angry, and everything we've seen afterwards seems to be the sort of enacting of a national intelligence infrastructure, or at least giving a mandate for that. Now, with his actions targeting Assange, his protection of Jimmy Savile, his identification by Czech authorities as potential MI6 agent, and his secret membership of the Rockefeller-founded Trilateral Commission, is Keir Starmer part of the intelligence infrastructure? And does that now partly rule in the United Kingdom?
Yes, I think it does, and I think he is. I mean, I don't have any proof, but of course, I mean, he was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, so obviously he is part of. People use the word deep state. I don't like the word deep state. I prefer to just say the state. I said this for years about Trump. People said the deep state was against Trump. No, the state was against Trump. The state. the State Department, the Pentagon, the Congress, the Army, the American Army. So it was wrong to talk about the deep state. It wasn't. There's nothing deep about it. It's perfectly open. The head of the American Army, General Milley, said that he would have disobeyed orders from Trump had they been given. So you had the state in rebellion against Trump. Starmer, by the same contrast, is, yes, totally embedded in the state. I cannot speculate. Well, I have speculated, but I obviously cannot prove that he has any connections specifically to the security services. But the state, in the sense that I'm using the word, so obviously the government, the civil service, parliament, the media is not obviously technically part of the state, but we all know that it operates. Certainly, certain parts of it operate very in close conjunction with the state, the BBC, the Guardian, and so on. That is a blob. That is, as it's often called, it's a block. It's a homogeneous unit, and he is very definitely totally part of that in a way in which his conservative predecessors, no doubt, were also, because they're not exactly rebels, but they were perceived, I think, by the establishment as unreliable, unpredictable populists. They'd partly done Brexit. Then you had people like Liz Truss, who sort of tried to resuscitate memories of Thatcherism and things like that. And the state, including, yes, the media, regarded them with suspicion and regarded Starmer as a breath of fresh air. Andrew Marr said famously, and it's been circulated on X and on all the social media, he said, "At last, Britain will become a haven of stability." What a wrong prediction that was. But the fact that he said that was, to me, indicative of what I think was almost definitely a very widely held view among the people within whom Sir Keir Starmer had made his career. After all, he was knighted, he had a very senior civil service position, and so on. So yes, I do think that.
Yeah. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the chat, though I think you're going to have to come back on, because to be honest, I've got so many questions for you, and you seem to be a man who's very well educated on these things. And to be honest, you agree with me on a lot of things. I do like to hear people explain it in different forms, though, so that I can understand it myself. The Dark Commission in the chat said, do you think that Starmer's Labour government will be so bad that ordinary folks will gladly accept the dissolution of UK Parliament eventually in favour of the World Economic Forum style globalist regional governments?
Well, I don't think they will gladly accept it. Let's not forget. Let's get back to some facts, which I'm sure everyone remembers, but which we perhaps need to remind ourselves of. Is that his support, in terms of votes, was very low. He got fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn in both 2017 and 2019. Everybody said this at the time. The reason why he won such a huge majority is, of course, that the Conservative voters stayed at home because they'd had enough of the Tories, and so they either didn't vote or they voted for Farage. So, no, I don't think the British generally will do this willingly. It might happen. I think Britain is weakened in many ways. I think all European states are weakened. I talked about the state a moment ago. So, yes, all the professions, the universities, the health service, the media, obviously Parliament, the civil service, all these people more or less agree with Starmer and with the globalist agenda. They agree on climate policy. Even most of the Conservatives agree on climate policy. They agree. Everyone agreed on COVID. They agreed on the authoritarian measures during COVID, etc., etc., etc. So, unfortunately, there is a danger. But the British electorate, no, I think the British electorate still regards these measures with, I mean, maybe I don't know if it's a majority, but I would have thought a substantial part of the electorate regards these measures with considerable suspicion. But the problem is that it's inchoate at the moment in Britain. Farage, of course, expresses part of this, yes. But for example, on immigration, Farage, until very recently, has been quite prudent, actually. Farage, for example, unlike, say, here in France, doesn't doesn't talk about Islam or Islamism. In France, people talk about it all the time. Even the government talks about it. It's a bit of a taboo in Britain. So things are not very structured in Britain. So, it's always the problem in politics. You can say, well, the people don't like it or whatever, but the people's dislike, if it is that, or their desires or whatever, they have to be structured. They have to be, formalized, and somehow they have to find a way of expressing themselves. Going into the street and surrounding a migrant hotel is not going to change anything.
Yeah, most definitely. And I tell you what, you are going to have to come back on because, like I say, there's so many questions from the chat that I haven't been able to ask you. I do want to make a quick note at the end because I noticed an article on the Forum for Democracy by Sid Lucassen on Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Moberg. Now, a few years ago, I wrote a deep dive investigation on Curtis Yarvin's family for Unlimited Hangout, and his brother Norman Yarvin seems like the number one suspect for the 2003 Yale pipe bombing. And his father was likely working for American intelligence. I found that very interesting, and I really like the fact that the platform that you're on is covering information like that. That's really important information to get out there. So thank you for the work you're doing. Thanks for coming on the show today. Please come back. Do you promise you will?
I'd be very happy to. Very happy.
Awesome. Excellent. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on the Johnny Vedmore Show, my friend.
Bye-bye.
And